the webcast of From the Biblical Files of Dr. Mack. I am Dr. Mack, and today we will continue our series of Women in the Bible as part one, and part two, we're going to be looking at Blacks in the Bible. Our focus today is on Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, the wife of David, and the queen mother of Israel. And as far as Blacks in the Bible, we're going to take a look at the heritage of Bathsheba. There's quite a bit of controversy that's associated with that. But our task today is to take a look at it. Well, Bathsheba experienced a lot in life. Sexual exploitations, marrying someone to avoid being stoned to death, for a husband and a baby, all within a few months. She lost them. But God's grace shows up in her life. She goes on to live a full life. She gives birth to and raises a king who would also be the wisest man in the world at that time. Eventually, she becomes a powerhouse of a queen mother. She had much to teach us about picking up the pieces and going on. So as we go through our session today, I pray that God will give each of us strength and grace and power to do whatever is needed in our lives as did Bathsheba. So our official topic is Queen Mother Bathsheba advises the future King Solomon. Our biblical source comes from the book of Proverbs, which is a collection of wise sayings and poems tied to material written and collected by Solomon. It also shows Israel's wisdom tradition, and it begins and fits right into our study of wisdom literature. The book of Proverbs is one of the books classified as poetry of scriptures. It also includes the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Psalms, the Songs of Solomon, as well as Proverbs. And they are examples of great Hebrew poetry. The word proverb typically refers to a short, clever saying that offers wisdom. While the book does not contain many hundreds of proverbs, most of them are within the book are those that come from what we are to use as we go through life. It's actually a frame within a frame. We have the outer frame, which is chapters 1 through 9, which are elaborate poems about wisdom. And then we have the inner section, which are found in the book, and they are those true sections of life. We have to go back to 1 Kings 4th chapter, 29th verse through the 33rd verse, where we talk about how God gave Solomon wisdom, and that his wisdom surpassed all that was known in the ancient East and in the wisdom of Egypt. But he was wiser than all men, and that included the ones that are named, and they can be historically traced. His fame was known throughout the world, and we know that this is going to come up when we eventually talk about another woman who visited him from an exotic place. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Um, he spoke and wrote about things simple as the cedars in Lebanon, or the hyssop that grows along the forest, or the birds that were creeping and flying through the air, and the fish that swam in the sea. Those were the things he wrote Proverbs about also. We are told that he also wrote and he talked about what it was like to live well in God's good grace. So the material from the book is sometimes very personal and sometimes a sharing of what was popular and what was taught at the time. On this particular webcast, we'll talk about his childhood and then we'll talk a little bit about his adulthood. But our focus is on his mother, Bathsheba. So the introduction goes on to say that by reading the book of Proverbs, you will gain knowledge. You will gain the type of knowledge that the Hebrews were using. And that was not the word knowledge as we do. They're talking about acquiring a skill. They are talking about applying knowledge, not so much as getting something just to have it, to know something just to have it. So in Exodus 31:3, I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in all kinds of craftsmanship. Well, the purpose of this book is to help you develop a set of practical skills for life and for living in the world in a good manner. It also links another foundational idea, which is the beginning of wisdom. And if you look at Proverbs first chapter, verse 7, 9, and 10, you'll see that. In Proverbs 7, fear the Lord in the beginning of wisdom. That is it. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. In verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The word fear is not about terror, but it is about respect, a sense of reverence. It is because I know Him and I realize that I have a very small place in the universe that I must give Him reverence. And that is the kind of fear that we are talking about. We have to talk in terms of coming before the Lord in a posture of humility. We have to talk about embracing the definite and indefinite things and the difficult and inconvenient things that we um, encounter in life. So the purpose of this was basically to give wisdom and instruction, to give understanding words of insight, to receive instructions in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, forgiving those who don't understand. We have to understand that we have knowledge and discretion that has to be given to the young. And we are going to ask the wise to listen and to add to their learning and to let the discerning get guidance and for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Notice that that is the second time that we've talked about fools who despise wisdom and instruction. The author of Proverbs is traditionally said to be Solomon because he could have uniquely qualified to serve as the principal author for the book. We see where Solomon recounts asking God for wisdom in his reign over Israel, and it was granted to him. Was Solomon is thus referred to and identified with this book that bears not his name, but the book of wise sayings that bring forth knowledge. There are sections in the book, and we will take a look at them. But our focus will be Proverbs 31, verses 1 through 9. And I know you say that's the virtuous woman, but there's so much more to the book of Proverbs than, or even chapter 31, than the virtuous woman. So the final two chapters, we will have a character, Agur, actually he is introduced in chapter 30 of Proverbs, verse 1. But then we get the introduction of Lemuel, which is chapter 31, verse 1. And their identities are to remain a mystery in history. So where are we? Well, we are talking about this collection of writings and verses from Solomon, and the contents we're looking at to have been bombed around 931 BC. Clearly, the book stayed in the southern kingdom of Judah, and we have more of his Proverbs, Proverbs 25 through 29. And this indicates that this was the final part of the end of Hezekiah's reign in 686. So the answer from a time frame would be those days. So what are the sections of the book of Proverbs? Well, it's divided into the initial invitation to wisdom, contrasting the wise man and the fool, and various topics. And then chapters 25 through 29, we discuss the justice, we discuss the wicked, we discuss the rich and the poor, while we're introduced to the sayings of a God and on the creation of divine power. It is divided into three parts. Chapters 1 through 9 contain 10 speeches about the virtues of being generous. Chapters 10 through 29 would be a collection of wise sayings about life. Chapters 30 through 31 would explore the Lord's personal, um, the Lord being personified as Lady Wisdom. In chapters 30-31, explore the fearing of the Lord and those things we want to remember. Now, why is it important to us? Because it just tells us in very short verses what it means with good instructions for living an effective life on earth, which is different from the other books that articulate profound theological truths, lengthy narratives of triumphs and failures, of prophetic teachings to a disobedient people. Proverbs is concerned only with taking instructions and giving the instructions to people in the path of wisdom. So different, let's say, from the first five books in the Bible. The writers of the book of Proverbs, if we're going to say writers, because there are those that Solomon admits to writing, recognize the various circumstances of a person's life and provide principles to apply in a variety of situations, rather than instructions to follow only in specific instances. So, why is it important to us today? Well, first, the book allows us to have an opportunity to pursue wisdom over the performance of being wise on an individual basis. It allows us to seek wisdom above all things as a fundamental option in a way of life. It portrays the quest as fulfilled with obstacles. No one said it was going to be easy. According to the words of the song, no one said the road would be easy. So we will have obstacles. In the book of Proverbs, we are given certain guidance in handling that. So what are the themes? What's the big idea? Well, early in the book, Proverbs first chapter, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear refers to our respect, as we said earlier, because he deserves it. It means living out our lives in light of what we know of him, holding him in the highest estimation, and depending on him with humble trust. Only then, Proverbs teaches, will we discover knowledge and wisdom. In writing the Proverbs, Solomon hoped to reach readers so that they would attain information on the practical things of life, and that we would do these things by living our lives under the authority of God. He specifically explained the book's purpose in the first chapter, verses 2 through 6, focusing on the imparting of wisdom in every factor of our life. Much of the book emphasizes listening to others so that we might learn from them and thereby combine the knowledge that we hear with the knowledge that we have, uh, so that, such as those persons who are in the teaching position as parents and elders or sages, uh, it would give them a unique opportunity to impact our lives. Wisdom then involves appropriating a measure of humility, first before God and then before others. So instead, we decide to speak rashly rather than to listen attentively, as is said in Proverbs 12:15, and then again in chapter 13, verse 3. This particular book, Proverbs, has what's called a recurring principle, which is common in Hebrew poetry. That recurring principle in the book of Proverbs is that you must choose wisdom, you must choose the wisdom, and you must follow God with blessed, so that you will be blessed in numerous ways. And those, I love that, would be a long life. Look at Proverbs 9, chapter 11, verse. He gives us in Proverbs advice on prosperity, joy, and the goodness of God. And those who reject God will suffer blame and death. And he says it right out in the third chapter, in the 35th verse, in the 10th chapter, in the 21st verse. So, key themes: fear the Lord, wisdom in God's good word. Now, where is the setting? What is the setting in Proverbs? Well, the events in the book of Proverbs span several centuries during Israel's history. Proverbs was compiled and arranged after Israel's return from exile in Babylon around the 5th to the 4th century BCE. We don't have a lot of characters in Proverbs, in the proverb that we're doing today, but we have to remember that God hears our prayers and brings us comfort. Going back to what David taught, and you'll notice here that we're going to talk about Bathsheba as the mother who teaches Solomon, but we have to remember too that David wrote Psalms, which was also instructions to Solomon. So Bathsheba is a main character. She was the wife of Uriah the Hittite and the daughter of Elam. She was the mother of Solomon and the great grandmother of Jesus. Characters specific to 31, King Lemuel plays the author of the book of Proverbs, and we know now and believe from the sages that that was young Solomon. And then King Lemuel's mother is the narrator per se, who is Bathsheba. And then we had Agar, we met in chapter 30, who is the model of the person who says, I don't know, and I want to learn from these proverbs. So he is a model of the person who is seeking wisdom. Earlier, we defined the book of Proverbs as a wisdom book. And in it, we basically can say a proverb is a saying that conveys a specific truth in a pointed way. It is a short sentence drawn from long experiences. It is a truth that is couched in a form that is easy to remember, a philosophy based on experience and a rule of conduct. It has been called a sentence, a maxim, an old saying. The key verse found in the first chapter again, Proverbs 1 and 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The ancient Orient and the ancient East were the homes of the Proverbs. Solomon probably gathered many of them from the surrounding countries of Mesopotamia and from Babylon. What are the characteristics and features of the book of Proverbs? Well, Proverbs bears no unscientific statements or inaccurate observations. Proverbs is a book on a high moral plane. Proverbs, as a book, does not contradict itself inwardly, while man's proverbs are often in opposition to each other. Well, let's take a look at where we want to be today. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 1 through 6. We're going to take some ideas from Rihanna, who produced a beginner's guide for Proverbs, and she called it a heartfelt study. So, Proverbs 31 is filled with the wisdom for one to navigate the twists of life and the turns that one will encounter. Therefore, it is a biblical roadmap, meant for a king. I know you said GPS now. Well, someone has to feed the GPS. Proverbs 31 includes lesson given to King Solomon, King David's heir, by his mother, so that he would have a hope-filled future. The beginning of the proverb identifies that it is a lesson that the king's mother spoke to him in childhood. From that information, we can see that this proverb is a lesson that Solomon was taught by his mother, or wisdom in his own circumstances as an affluent king. The lessons of Proverb 31 are directed toward men. I know that sounds contradictory because almost all women will look at Proverbs 31 verses 10 through 30 and say, "Oh, what is a virtuous woman?" But that was written for men. Those were, many sages believe, those were things that were given to Solomon by Bathsheba. So the purpose of Proverbs is instructions by a mother to her son who would one day be king. The purpose of the lesson is to lead him to make wise life decisions as a king and to reign correctly. It also gives instructions on what to look for in a wife and how to treat her once you have located her. It could be used in the same manner today when bringing up children. The first 9 verses contain instructions on how a man, specifically a king, should live honorably with wisdom. A look at the mother's motivation. The author of chapter 1 in King Lemuel, it is Lemuel who was believed to be the author. In his name, and you will hear it over and over, means belonging to God. It is believed that Lemuel is a nickname given to Solomon by his mother. Solomon was the second child conceived by Bathsheba with King David. The first child perished, thereby making Solomon the first living child. Go back to 2 Samuel 11 and 12. The spoken lessons that his mother taught him could have been done by way of song, because it was a common practice for Hebrew mothers to sing the lessons to their children. The term burden means that it could have been repeated over and over throughout his life. Lessons were often repeated so that they could be committed to memory. And there are 5 reasons why King Lemuel is a nickname for Solomon. There are ancient Jewish traditions that believe that Solomon is Lemuel. Early historians have come to the conclusion that Lemuel was Solomon. Nicknames were fairly common throughout the Bible and in Hebrew culture. There's no historical reference to an actual king named Lemuel. Lemuel means belonging to God, which could have been a nickname Bathsheba used for Solomon. It makes sense that she would have dedicated Solomon to God after losing her first child. Then we go back and we look at Proverbs 22 and 6. Now, Proverbs 31, verse 2, Bathsheba's story contains sorrow and joy. Bathsheba is calling Solomon's attention to what is coming next. She expresses, "What, my son?" three different times and in three different ways. "What, my son?" This starts off as a simple call to attention. She establishes their relationship, her authority as mother, the importance of listening, because he will need to be paying attention to what she has to say next. Secondly, "What, my son of my womb?" She has his attention now, and by repeating it, she is solidifying the importance of the words to come. She takes it a step deeper by signifying that he was once a part of her. The womb of a mother is the most important part of a child's early life. It signifies sacrifice, sustaining life, and the deep bond between the child and the mother in those early moments. Thirdly, "What, my son?" or as translated, "What, son of my vow?" This is the third time that she's calling for his attention. Next, she states his importance, and he has to understand, because this is important. Not only did Solomon come from her body, but she made a vow to God for him. He is premised to God, dedicated to God, set apart for God's purpose. Solomon is Bathsheba's rainbow baby, a baby that is born after a miscarriage, a stillbirth, or death due to natural causes. A rainbow baby does not replace the child that is lost. Instead, they give the mother an outlet to share her love. The rainbow shines through after the storm. It does not mean that the storm never happened, just that there is always hope. By calling Solomon son of my vows signifies that Solomon was dedicated to God and an answer to prayers to God for a child. Once again, the nickname Lemuel, belonging to God, makes perfect sense. The way Solomon begins this proverb shows how much he honored his mother. In the third verse, Bathsheba, and it has a subtitle, why is it important to have standards? Bathsheba impresses upon Solomon the importance of who you surround yourself with. Do not spend time and energy on empty sex. Avoid being controlled or distracted by people, specifically women, whose purpose is to use and manipulate you. Do not take part in a lifestyle that is known to destroy kings. Avoid destructive women. What she doesn't want is for her son to get caught up in a sinful lifestyle, because it will lead to his ruin. If Solomon were to get caught up in sex, then women could possibly manipulate him through that route. Why didn't Solomon follow his own advice about women? Solomon must have loved ladies during his reign. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. There is even the story of how he had an affair with the Queen of Sheba. Ultimately, the choice to engage with pagan women in his life sets him against God by building altars to their idol gods. He wrote in Ecclesiastes and in Proverbs, words that mirror his regret in his choice to follow pagan practices in his nation. He should have listened to his mother. Hindsight is 2020. She understood his proclivity towards women and warned him not to give away his power to women or to ways that destroy kings. Later, she explained what those ways were. She wants for her son to have wisdom so that he can lead well. If he is making foolish decisions based on desires and not on a sound mind, his rule as a king will be affected by his choices. Just because he has riches and powers and can have all the women doesn't mean that it is the right thing for him to do. With great power comes great responsibility. Verses 4 and 5. A king must be sober and just. Bathsheba told Solomon because he is a king, he should not drink intoxicating substances. He should not give in to the desire to get drunk. If he does get drunk while carrying out his duties as king, he might make mistakes. A drunk king is a corrupt king. Because addiction in is an ancient problem, Bathsheba had the wisdom to warn Solomon about the act and the consequences of alcohol abuse. Drinking wine during that particular period of time in that particular location was often safer than drinking water. But drinking immense amounts of wine with the intent to have a mind altering experience posed a problem. Poor decisions will be made by a king or a judge if he is not sober. Solomon's job as king was important, and he needed to be present and ready to exact judgment and justice for his people. Verses 6 and 7. The importance of compassion. Now, in verses 4 and 5, it was written that it is not for kings to get drunk. However, in verses 6 and 7, we have the opposite being shown. Alcohol is a remedy for those who are perishing, those who have no hope, whose soul is bitter. The physical body is on its last breath, and the mind cannot cope with the reality of their current affliction. Their drinking is a relief from present pain. Drinking cannot solve the issues, and eventually the emotions need to be recognized and dealt with in a healthy way. People will never heal if they do not allow themselves to experience and to work through the process. Things happen in our lives that is devastating. We cannot stop living and become constantly intoxicated because of them. Proverbs 8 and 9. Well, Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. Be a voice for the voiceless. Bathsheba is telling Solomon to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Speak for those who are appointed to die, or literally, the sons of passing away. Sons of destruction implies those who have no choice. Their death is inevitable. It also means those given to destruction, or their ways lead to death. She tells Solomon to speak and judge righteously without partiality, to judge right for those who are afflicted and destitute. Two life lessons from Proverbs verses 89. Number one, don't be afraid to speak up when it's in your power to do so. Number two, be impartial. It should not matter who is involved. Truth is truth, right is right. Do what is right in the eyes of God. But Sheba wanted to teach her son to rule rightly. He would need to take his position and power very seriously. But Sheba taught her son what a godly woman looks for. And she set the example. And that would lead us into the subject of the virtuous woman. Most of the sages believe that it was Bathsheba herself who was the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31. And that's not going back and thinking about the affair with David. Christianity is not a story about people who live flawless lives and breeze their way into heaven, having never been scarred by sin. Now, if we want to take a look at the words of King Lemuel from his mother in Proverbs 31 through 9, we can look at it from the ESV Bible, and we'll note some of the same comments that we made before. We have the subheading here starting in verse 31, and that is where we have Agar, who is thought to have been King Lemuel. And what we find out later is that two pseudonyms were used. Agar was Solomon, and so was King Lemuel. For a teaching device, it was great. This is something similar that we will find when we get to the book of Ecclesiastic, and we have quote unquote the preacher. But in fact, it is Solomon, and he uses the pseudonym to write. So we have the things here that he set up because he made Lemuel somewhat as a foreigner, but one who needed to understand how the prophets had delivered messages to others through these wise sayings. We have the subheadings again there, and we have to understand that they are tied directly to the writing. Now, there are three requirements for righteous rule that comes in um, verses 2 through 9, and it could very well be called ammunition because here you are being told what you need to do to be a successful king. Bathsheba is in the right place to know how to be a successful king. She has witnessed all that has happened. She understands with the consciousness of a mother what he will encounter. She does not want him to do uh, do not use his authority as a means for debauchery. She wants him to keep a clear head from stupefying effects of alcohol. She wants him to use his power to help those who are powerless, as it says in verses 8 and 9. All of this is future for Solomon. All of this is what she has known since the day of his birth, because she has been there as the wife of King David. The one that is most interesting is Sana Mabal. Here she said she prayed for Solomon, and she continues to pray for Solomon. You know, the first child died, and Solomon, God gives her Solomon. And many of the sages say that Solomon was a symbol uh, of her redemption, that she had not sinned, but had been the one who was sinned against. She warns him of things such as diseases and the squandering of the national wealth and the distraction that comes from state duties, and by subjecting himself to scandal, to blackmail, to vengeful plotting, which did occur in the palace very often between the wives and between those who served the king, and even between the children, which we found out in David's dying days, that was a part of moral degeneration that could lead to other vices. Everything that she's saying is there, but Solomon seems to forget it. In verses 4 and 5, he said, do not be a mean ruler. Don't drink the alcoholic beverages. You know, this was a warning about excess, as much. about excess in power as it was about excess in alcohol. You know, if you're going to rule, she says that you must be one who understands strict moderations. If you're going to drink, drunkenness, however, is another matter. It's not to be had. Now, we have to go back and look at Psalm 104 and verse 15. You know, where God talks about the use of alcohol. Well, David talks about the use of alcohol. And again in Proverbs 23, chapter 23, verses 29 and 35. As we're going through, as I say, like to say, as we're digging a little deeper, these points were told to Solomon at a very young age, and they were reinforced throughout his life. That was quote unquote the burden. That was the ammunition that had to go. So what we have in the conclusion in the verses there, we have an understanding to speak out, to be compassionate, to understand moderation, and to do that with not just what I'm saying to him as mom, but what will be part of his life for a long time. Solomon had not only his dad as a king to look forward to, but he had the stories that came from other Middle Eastern monarchs of his day and how they had not been successful. Mary Hundred wrote a piece called A Mother's Advice, and in it she is continuing to talk about um, Bethesda's lessons to Solomon, and the fact that we have one more name from Solomon. The other name that we have is Jedediah, and that was the name that David had given to him. So we have that one more name, which means beloved of the Lord. All of his names, symbolic names, nicknames, is important because they're all tied to from the very beginning that he was truly dedicated to God. So we have this. We have to understand that God forgives, and He did David and Bathsheba, and that Bathsheba herself cherished the God name that was given to her son. And as Queen Mother, for a long time, she was there for him. She was there actually after David died. So we can look at Second Chronicles and we can see some other names associated there. I do love the fact don't fritter away your strength when pursuing women. She just puts it very plainly and she tells them it leaves one unable to remember the law and how to make just decisions. Stand up for the weak and the helpless, be compassionate, and stay in touch with reality. Solomon shows his respect for his mother. It's recorded in conversations throughout the book. One of the nicest ones that we have is where Bathsheba, Solomon, Abishag, and David are together. And this is during the plotting, which she warned him against, the plotting of Edwin to take the throne of David. And you get a visual picture of the encounter when she comes in and he there's another throne chair brought in and places her in it, and he listens, and he doesn't yell at her, but he sees through the kind words that she is saying, through the to the threat that his brother is trying to do. But the advice for all of the things, the basic things that his mother gave him, he did not take the advice. So it's advice not taken. That's what Herndon said. He didn't follow his mother's advice. He didn't see. Uh, he didn't see what was to come, even though she told him this is what will come. He was useful, he was vigorous, he was confident. God had given him wisdom, riches, honor. He felt assured of God's love and favor. Go back to First Kings, third chapter, 4 through 14 verses. He built a magnificent house. That's the temple. And God blessed it with his glory. So Solomon had been placed on the right path. Does not mean that he stayed on it, because he didn't. So in the end, according to Herndon, there was some intercession that his mother gave him. Um, she the I mentioned the excesses again, but she encouraged him to remember this. So Solomon did compile the wise sayings, and the wise sayings are from his mom. So going on down, or putting together, we've talked about Agar and King Lemuel's mother, because this is an opportunity for him, for Solomon to write these down and to have someone there, a person, quote unquote, uh, to receive the advice, the things that his mother had taught him, because she looked upon him as the queen mother and one who had been blessed by God to have him. So Solomon understood and didn't understand. The wisdom that God had given him allowed him to rule wisely. There are so many instances in the Bible where he made wise decisions, but the one with the women is the one where he lost it, because he did not necessarily engage. The Bible doesn't say he engaged in the paganism, but he built altars for them to engage in the paganism. So that was not what God had done. Now, we haven't talked about the word prophecy or oracle here, but in a way, look at it this way: that was actually an oracle, a prophecy from his mother to him about what was to come in his life. She is cited as one who had truly repented from her adultery, and she seriously wanted to set up her son for success and not for failure. She wanted to make sure that she gave him basic rules, and I, I, I think part of his wisdom is that he wrote those rules down in the manner that we're reading today, so that they would be there for others to share with their children. Now, we want to go ahead and talk about what made such a strong woman. You know, we don't want to retell the story of the bathing incident and David seeing her. But what are the characteristics of Bathsheba that stand out, that made her such a good mother? What made her such a good mother? So we have to take a look at what we have here and know that she was, and all that she had, she was willing to give to him. And we have it recorded back in the words of Agar, Lemuel, and Lemuel's mother. Now we move a little bit into the second part of our topic today. Was Bathsheba blind? That is a question that has been raised over and over. Was Solomon blind? That is another question that has been raised over and over. There are there are scriptures that actually say that, and we're going to take a look at some recent scholarship here, and we're going to look at the fact that she was the granddaughter of the wisest counselor that David had. However, once the seduction occurred, then he didn't say much, but he did retire. And then later he schemed with Absalom, and then that was unsuccessful. Then he went home and he committed suicide. Now, we don't know whether we have those scholars who say that she was, um, that Bathsheba was a member of the Canaanite tribe, and that King Solomon was also, he was also black. And we do know for a fact that she was married originally to a Hittite. So the theories dated back to the 17th century, are linked to him, who was a son of Noah, and the fact that we have the words that describe blackness. And we have the articles that say that his son, Solomon's son, was black. And we have so much regarding the color of his skin, the texture of his hair, and even the other tribes that would be associated with black Hebrew Israelites, or just black Israelites. So we have that discussion to go through. and we have to still talk about the meaning of the verses that were taught for us today. Our time is running out, but we have to take a look at some of the newer scholarship that we have on board today. We have Wesley Miles, who talks about the black, revealing the black women of the Bible. And she talks about how they are just overlooked, or it's written around the fact that they are black. It's an interesting study for those of you who would like to go into your own or establish your own files as to um, the blacks who were in the Bible. What's said in the rabbinic writings and what has been discovered in recent years. The one thing that we do know is that her life lessons um, are those that were really astounding to a woman of that time. And we have to go back to 2 Samuel so much here in order to understand who and what she was. What did she accomplish? We can take a look at the fact that she is revered as one of the mothers of the nation of Israel. She was a faithful wife to David. She became influential in the royal palace. Uh, she was especially loyal. She was especially loyal to her son. And she did everything in her position to make sure that Solomon remained wise and faithful. It was Solomon who fell, as they like to say, fell off the wagon. But her story can be found in 2 Samuel, as I said earlier, 11th chapter, verses 1 through 3, uh, chapter 12, verse 20, 24, 1 King, um, and Psalms. But her occupation was that of queen mother, one who was dedicated to her sons. If you want to look at so many of the other passages that we have there, we can take a look. She goes all the way into the New Testament. You'll find mention of her in Matthew, and one of my favorites, I mentioned it earlier, is Psalms 51 and 1. But you can find her in Matthew 1 and 6. Regarding those, Tony Evans wrote regarding Bathsheba as being a black person. Um, we have so many others who, what I like to call recent scholarship. She is definitely linked in the lineage of Christ. There are podcasts dedicated to the discussion of was she or was she not. But we will go and use her as a model. That is what we want to do. I think of her as an African woman. I do. I think of her as an African woman um, from the Canaanite tribes. And that she raised her son, Solomon, to be a good king. She is a perfect example of starting the parenting step off right. Earlier we talked about David's parenting. Uh, his was somewhat negative. If we wanted to put it on that scale, we can say that Bathsheba's was positive. We have so many who have written as to the blackness of Solomon, as well as the blackness of David. But we will go on and we will take a look at the recent scholarship. As I was raised to say, we will pray over it, and she is a model for us to use, and a model for all mothers to use. And Solomon was one who received the basic training. I'm comfortable with the fact that um, she's a descendant of Ham. I am comfortable with that. Leslie Miles' book, Revealing Black Women in the Bible, and we have David Fortron, who wrote Lesser Known People in the Bible, Black Women. Um, so the lesser known people were black. And Bathsheba is one of those. Because she is usually depicted as a bad girl. She is not. She is not a bad girl. She was a mom who did what needed to be done. And for Miles to say that she is going to not fail these women, it becomes an important. study. I invite you to visit our email address, and if you have questions or comments, please feel free to write those questions and comments. Our next webcast will come from the book of Ecclesiastes, and we will be talking about the fact that there was, quote, no upright women. That should prove interesting since we're talking about one who was a very good woman today. May God bless and keep you. Please join us next time. Thank you very much.